Hi, friends. Welcome to the Inclusive Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Ashwini Prasad. And today, oh my goodness, we are speaking with Zosimo Maximo, who is a Filipino US American. He was born in West Virginia in the United States, and he grew up in Southeast Ohio. He ventured out to New York City to study fashion at Parsons School of Design. And his journey has taken him to working with high-end clients in fashion like Damon Wayans, to a streetwear business, to directing, producing, and being a filmmaker. Today, Zosimo and his wife are focused on an inclusive health and wellness streaming channel. And Zosimo is going to be doing a documentary about streetwear. So exciting. I'm so excited to share Zosimo's conversation with you all, especially during AAPI month, which is Asian US American and Pacific Islander month in the United States. And Zosimo and I are part of a group of AAPI creatives. So thank you so much for being here. If you are liking this content, please leave a review, download, and share these episodes. And in addition, I'm an anti-oppression and anti-racism educator and consultant. And if there's any way that I can support you or your business in your work being a social justice advocate, feel free to connect and let's see if we can create some safe spaces together. You can find me at theinclusivescreenwriter.com or on Instagram at The Inclusive Screenwriter. All right, folks, take a listen. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Inclusive Storytelling Podcast. I am so excited for today, like I always am, but this guest is so special because he and I also connect outside of the podcast. So Zosimo, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Oh, we're so excited you're here. So Zosimo, as I do with all my guests, you're the one that can introduce yourself, so much better than I can. So give us a little spiel about who you are.
Sure. I am a fashion designer turned filmmaker that has always had a entrepreneurial spirit in me. So I guess you can call me a serial entrepreneur. Kind of looking at my track record, I was born in Charleston, West Virginia. There's a little trivia for you. How does a Filipino guy like me get born in Charleston, West Virginia? But my dad was he's a retired physician, but back in the late 60s, there was a movement to bring Asian and Indian resident doctors to the US. And that's how we're kind of all scattered across the Midwest in America. And my dad was recruited to come to West Virginia. So my oldest brother and sister were born in the Philippines. And then the brother that is above me, he and I were born in Charleston, West Virginia. We didn't spend much time there, but I actually grew up in Cambridge, Ohio, which is kind of a little bit east of Columbus and south of Cleveland. But I knew my world was a little bit bigger than, Cambridge, Ohio. So I was like, well, it's going to get me out of here. And that happened to be fashion. I was that kid with the first pair of Jordans. I was very much into streetwear and sneakers and athletic wear. So, Nike, Adidas, Stussy, Polo, things like that. So that is how I got out of Ohio and became a fashion designer by going to Parsons in New York City. So that was where I did my undergrad.
Fabulous intro. I just love it. Fashion design, and it really kind of relates to the work that you're doing now, just because I think athleticism has also turned into something that is fashion forward, whether you like it or not. I love what you're saying about being born in West Virginia, because I actually grew up in Calgary, Alberta. So it always kind of fascinates me, right? The stories about how somebody with Indian ancestry ends up in Calgary, Alberta.
Right.
And it's that movement of jobs. Other immigrants went there for work or for school. that people follow, and you can find this tracing almost of how people got
Mhm.
to a certain area that are immigrating, and it's usually related to other people coming for school or for work or other opportunities. So it's fascinating. So I did not
Yeah, it's
know
kind of
about West
it's
Virginia, but
neat.
it's amazing.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but what's neat is that a lot of families could have immigrated towards the bigger cities and the coasts. So having like the Asian and Indian physicians recruited kind of put us everywhere, so that there were communities. We were in I grew up in what was called the tri-state area of West Virginia and Ohio. So yeah, it was to see Filipinos in Pittsburgh, Wheeling, Ohio, or Wheeling, West Virginia. Yeah, so it was Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. So to actually see um, some BIPOC faces, um, helped, I believe, these smaller rural areas, get a taste of our culture and who we are, and bring us to a modern day of understanding and a little bit of integration within these smaller communities.
No, and it is fascinating because it's everything from the doctors, like physicians, like your family, to, like my parents worked in convenience stores and gas stations. So
Mhm.
it's, again, iterating that we're not a monolith and there's so many different ways that people come. So you end up at Parsons, right, in New York
Yes.
City. So you're 17, 18 years old, around then. How was your experience, doing fashion in New York City at that time in your life? And what did you see? Were you getting a similar experience, with New York being so diverse? Were you taught by diverse people? Did you have a diverse influence in what fashion looked like? Outside of from maybe the Jordans, right, which are influenced by a black man, but I'm interested, in the people you were surrounded by. Did you feel that it was one diverse, and did you feel included in your work and schooling and the people you were around?
I think New York City is just amazing. So, it truly is the melting pot. And, when I got there, not only was I introduced to several other ethnicities outside of Asian, but within, Asian ethnicities, I was meeting, Vietnamese and Cambodian and Korean, Chinese. And I grew up in an area that maybe only had less than a dozen families of Asian descent. So to be able to open up my world and to meet other Asian ethnicities was really really cool. A lot of international students at Parsons as well. One of my early mentors is somebody that I was interning with while I was at Parsons was Anna Sui. Anna is an American Chinese fashion designer that was really, really big in the 90s. She was like the pioneer of the kind of glam rock era. And yeah, to have her as really my first boss was pretty cool. I was being exposed to somebody at a really, really high level that worked extremely hard to get there, that was super confident leading her team, a very diverse team. So was very fortunate to just get really immersed in New York City, taking that in as a kid from Ohio. That's like, whoa, it's like so much going on. Um, but to be with Anna those first couple of years was really, really cool and fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to have that experience. And so I want to dig just a little bit more. Were your instructors also diverse? So it seems like your students, and of course New York City was. What about your instructors? Were they giving you kind of the history of Chinese cloth and textiles, for example, or was the content a little bit more centered on Eurocentric?
Yeah, I don't really recall too much, coming from my instructors. But where I was really seeing like culture was like going down to Chinatown and even looking at the clothing that's just hanging in the street, the textiles there. loved, Indian areas of New York City. That's where I was exposed to and fell in love with Indian food. I think I eat Indian food at least once a week now, but that was New York City. And then, the street festivals of New York City, they're always every weekend. One specific ethnic group was probably having a parade, and I would love just kind of stumbling in on those parades and seeing the pageantry and the costumes and everything. So just really soaking it in, I think, and maybe not even knowing that you're taking that much in. I would just, back when rollerblading was kind of big, I would just put the rollerblades on.
Yes.
And that's how I got to really learn the city. I would just pick a new area every weekend and rollerblade in and out of those areas. And then that's when you start to discover, like, oh, there's a whole Indian section over here, or there's a Brazilian section up here. And then, Chinatown is always an amazing experience in New York. But I hope, I wish I could tell you that I was learning about international costumes and textiles at Parsons, but it was mainly the exposure of being in New York City and meeting the people.
Isn't that fascinating? Because you're not the only one who said this to me, not just on the podcast, but in general, where you're kind of finding this community and it's very diverse, but you're not necessarily getting it from the institutions you're in. The institutions you're in are still very Eurocentric based. So I wish you could tell me that too, but unfortunately your story is not inconsistent or a surprise. But it's something I wanted to highlight for our listeners that, these things, I think they're getting better and I hope that they continue to get better, but they have been pretty broken and pretty exclusive for far too well, probably since their inception, unfortunately. All right, so you're this rollerblading. I just see you right now, right? Early 20s, doing your thing in fashion school under this wonderful mentor. What happens after you graduate and you're, on that career path?
Yeah, so I discovered streetwear, which was, really starting to emerge in the early 90s. So I lived in the Lower East Side, that St. Mark's area, the Lafayette area of the Lower East Side. You were starting to see these really cool streetwear shops emerge and skate shops. And those two worlds were kind of blending, which is as a filmmaker, one of my next projects is the history of streetwear that we're going to tackle next. But yeah, I fell in love with this culture of, it was a lot of young artists being rebellious and, anti-corporate and, flipping corporate logos and, into these fun t-shirt graphics or skateboard graphics. And I just really, really love the culture. And I moved my attention away from high fashion to streetwear. And I started my own label in New York City called Cooley Clothing New York.
So amazing. Oh my gosh, you're taking me back to the streets of Vancouver because I had my formative years in Vancouver, BC, and I remember we'd walk in and out of those skate shops and the thrift shops and the streetwear shops, and you had the large t-shirts. This is the 90s, right? So that baggy look was definitely in, and the flannel. And I remember just like all these t-shirts just hanging all around in all the shops. You're just totally taking me back, and I absolutely love it. So how was your experience with that? Were you kind of taking from Parsons and maybe having streetwear, or was there really that more of that ethnic feel in your streetwear and being influenced by various ethnicities in the streetwear you were providing?
Yeah, the streetwear that I was interested in, streetwear was kind of born out of two sections. It was born out of New York hip hop, and then it was born out of the California surf skate culture. So I was a little bit more, drawn to the New York hip hop style of streetwear. So very urban. With that came, a lot of the five elements of hip hop, you could say, of b-boying and DJing and breakdancing, emceeing, and then just the real feel of like the Lower East Side where it was really starting to emerge. So there were brands like Swish and extra large, Supreme, Union was down in Soho. They were a big, early pioneer in that game. Zoo York, things like that. So you saw skaters, wearing the streetwear. And what was cool in the early 90s is it was kind of blending two worlds. So, obviously I was always out in the clubs. The clubs were just, booming back in the 90s in New York City. So what you would see is the high fashion community, which I was a part of. And then you would see like the streetwear heads starting to merge into that world, because the hip hop artists were always at this, we're chasing the models. So you would always see, Russell Simmons and LL Cool J and all these people that were kind of mixing with the high end fashion design community. And then they kind of drew in, some of the skaters and stuff like that. So it was really, really awesome in New York City in the 90s in that fashion scene of seeing all these communities blend.
That's amazing. And I wonder if it was different in California, just because California's demographics, and compared to, like, I would say maybe not necessarily LA, but the outskirts, right? That surfer kind of, I have an image in my head versus New York City, where the percentage of people of color are definitely a lot more. So it's interesting, but I can imagine there was a lot of overlap, but there was a lot of distinction between the two coasts.
Yeah, and what happened was I knew that a lot of the industry was happening in California. The big trade shows were out there, the ASR show, the Magic Show in Las Vegas. So we packed up and we moved the company to LA. And that is exactly what was happening. You kind of had two fractions that were happening. You had the surf skate culture that was still very surf and skate, that, you had brands like Fresh Jive that were kind of, a part of that rave scene and starting to bring some of the music element in. But it was really like Massimo, Stussy, Schrobeck,
Mhm.
um, and your real surf brands of like OP and things like that were still kind of a part of this world. But there was an independent streetwear culture that was emerging out of LA as well, that was kind of based on graffiti, like con art, and then which became more urban. And then you started
Mhm.
seeing the music get implemented. There were early like Black Eyed Peas and Jurassic Park and people like that were a part of the streetwear culture. And then you started seeing people move into LA, like Shepard Fairey, who was Obey, and just really bringing this kind of this street music element that still had this kind of laid back Cali feel. Definitely the coasts were totally different. New York was still very New York eccentric, coming from the street. And then LA had a little bit of that surf and skate, was starting to move in towards the underground music scene, but also in the art scene. But then you also just had that straight Cali laid back vibe, right? Of
Yeah.
the just like, the sun is always shining, cannabis is always plentiful.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then you had like the kind of the cholo mix starting to come in with brands like Soul Assassins and Tribal and Penal Code and everything. But yeah, if we can capture this in the history of streetwear documentary, which we're
Mm.
about ready to tackle, it's going to be a wonderful story.
Oh, I agree. And the nostalgia, like, I'm getting chills right now, and that nostalgia you're giving me, that's just, oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait to see this streetwear doc. So, would you say that the streetwear kind of emergence in the 90s that you saw on both coasts were led by more folks that were non-whites?
A little of both, yeah. So you did have, because the surf skate culture was primarily white, they kind of opened the doors to this kind of independent, make the t-shirt on your own, screen print it on your own, hire, friends and graphic designers, and let's throw trade shows. So the surf skate culture was always a little bit that FU culture to corporate America,
Yeah.
so they kind of showed us the way business wise to go, hey, we can have fun. This whole thing can be a party, but we could still have our brands. And then you saw a lot of, African American brands starting to emerge out of that were independent, and the Latinx community with some of those brands that I mentioned. And then, you saw Asians like myself and a handful of others kind of jump in the game too.
Nice. And I just think about the music that coincided with the
Mhm,
streetwear as well, that 90s, early 2000s music. And
mhm.
that could be a documentary in itself. That's a series. That's a limited series right
It
there.
really is. Yeah. Except I don't want to tackle all the music rights. So we'll let someone else handle that.
Absolutely. Yeah, your budget will be gone very
Yes.
quickly.
Yes. We just want old photos and magazine clippings of streetwear, and then that'll be my contribution to the culture.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, you never know where it leads, right? And
Yes, yes.
this could be the seed that's been planted for something bigger and better and be able to get those rights.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I love it. And so, as you were kind of doing this, I know that there was a transition point for you as
Mhm.
well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as I was a clothing designer, I was also, young and kind of partying all the profit away. So I had to get a job. and I went into high-end retail. So my buddy pulled me into Gucci, and I started working at Gucci Beverly Hills. And I started rounding up some celebrity clients that were coming to Gucci, and we were kind of hitting it off. And it was Damon Wayans' crew that asked me to style him for some of his television projects. So that kind of led to styling music videos and commercials. And then I was just on set, and I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. I had always been a big fan of independent film. That was a big inspiration for my design work. But when I actually started getting on set, and this is even back when music videos were still, $500,000. So it was just a good time. It was always, a long day. There were 16-hour days, but you just saw the director in charge of everything. And, there were a lot of people contributing into this one art form, everything from the stylist to the makeup artist to the casting director, to the producers, the DPs. And I was like, this is something I want to do. I said, I think this is the next move for me. So I actually got transferred to go back to New York, and I started working for Gucci in New York. Also met stylists like June Ambrose, who's a big celebrity stylist, and she kind of helped me transition into styling as well. And then I started going to the new school just at night after work, put a short film together, sent it out to Art Center College in Pasadena. That was my one single choice, was to go to Art Center, because a lot of commercial and music video directors were coming out of Art Center at the time, and that's exactly what I wanted to go into, was music video and commercial. So I got accepted into Art Center College. I met my wife at the time. I was in New York. She was a actress, and we were like, hey, let's pack up the bags, let's go to Cali, let's have some fun. I'm going to the film school, and you can pursue your acting
Mhm.
career out there. So we moved, and I started going to Art Center.
Nice, nice. Lots of transitions there, but it feels like it's definitely just the beginnings of that path that you were weaving for you and now your family, of the next steps, but being able to combine all these different loves and putting them together. And that's a dream. It's not always easy, but it is fulfilling.
Yeah, luckily I had very supportive parents. I mean, every 5 years they'd be like, when are you going to medical school? I'd be like, I don't think it's going to
Ah,
happen at this
right,
point. But
right.
thank you for, supporting my artistic career this far, thus far. And you start to wonder, like, am I flip-flopping? Am I trying to do too much? But I've always just followed my heart and have been able to pursue that and get support from my family to pursue that. As an artist, it's kind of hard to stay singular, and as you start to evolve, you start to look at other platforms. And I knew that storytelling was something that I wanted to do, visual storytelling as well. So I was just kind of opening up that, that new box of really expanding my art. I also studied photography while I was at Art Center. Got to, kind of play around with that as well. But yeah, I really, the fashion, was never lost. It's always a part of. It really taught me my aesthetic, and really honed in on my sensibility as a fashion designer, as a streetwear designer. Working both streetwear and high end. Once I got to Gucci, it was all just flash and branding, and how to really build a brand. So yeah, I was learning kind of branding and entrepreneurship during that whole experience that has helped me as a filmmaker.
That's amazing. Amazing. So fast forward, lots going on in between, but now I feel like with everything that we've talked about, because we know each other outside of this
Mhm.
episode, I feel like a lot of that is really just honed in right now. Not to say that there's not a lot to
Mhm.
evolve, but everything you're doing right now is really an accumulation of all of these different experiences. And so I would love to talk a little bit about what you're doing today and all the wonderful work that you are starting with this amazing combination of everything we've talked about. So tell our listeners some of the things that you're working on right now, and for the people that are watching the video of this, why I might be dressed up in a hoodie. I
Sure.
try, right?
Sure. Yeah. So I have been an athlete all my life. That was probably the thing that I initially thought was going to get me out of my little town in Ohio, was that I was a star athlete in my town, both basketball and baseball. And, I had dreams of becoming a pro baseball player. But that kind of, I was like 5'9", 5'10" by the time I hit my freshman year. And
Hmm.
then I grew to 5'11" and a half, and that was it.
It
So the
happens,
dream,
right?
yeah, the dream of being a basketball player, not that, yes, there were 5'3" basketball players, but yes, at 5'11" and a half, it was a hard path for both baseball and basketball, but always stayed fit, stayed active as much as I could. And after film school, I started directing both commercials and reality television. So I got to the unscripted side pretty quickly, MTV, BET, and then that led me to The Ultimate Fighter on Spike Television. So I was a director producer on that, and I just, we used to film, 16 guys basically training all day. And that kind of made me miss the camaraderie of sports and being a part of a team. And I remember reality television can take a toll on you,
Hmm.
if you're on the road a lot, and which I
Hmm.
was. And my wife and I had our first son at the time. I was doing Ultimate Fighter, and I was 6 days in Las Vegas, with my family living in LA. So I'd have to drive back to LA, see my kid for, literally 6-7 hours, and drive right back to Las Vegas. So I kind of knew I wanted off of that train, and that led me to some working full time on the digital side. First with a company in LA called Vimby, which ultimately became the Mark Burnett Digital Studio. I was a founder and creative director of Vimby. But because of Vimby, I got recruited to come to Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. There was a media company called Stack that had a high school fitness magazine. They were the only one in the country, and they had a partnership with Gatorade. They also had a tie to IMG, which is the big sports agency and academy. There's a division here in Cleveland. So they brought me here to Cleveland. And at the time, also, because this coincides, my wife was stopped acting after she had our first child and started working for Lululemon. She became a very popular fitness instructor out in LA. Lululemon scooped her up. As I was getting recruited to come to Cleveland, she had an opportunity to become the store manager of Lululemon here in Cleveland and to open up a couple stores here. So that was a great opportunity. 5 years went by of both of us in those roles. And my wife always had a dream of opening up a fitness boutique. So I was like, hey, I want in on this, because I started running like Tough Mudders and things like that, which I was really down to 3 workouts, which was cycling, yoga, and boot camp. We decided to open up what is called Groove Ride. That is a fitness boutique. It's a micro gym that offers like Soul Cycle indoor styling. We have like a Barry's boot camp style boot camps. We also do bar yoga and boxing. And we became really, really popular here in Cleveland, Ohio. Within, 4 years, we had 3 studios, thousands of followers, and then the pandemic hit. When the pandemic hit, it made us really look at a lot of things. Both the pandemic was happening, the election was happening, and a lot of social unrest was happening with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and many others, countless others. So it made us really examine our business in the arena that we're in, which is high-end fitness. There are companies out there that kind of started this whole trend, Soul Cycle and some of the ones in New York. And they were very adamant and open in the beginning, saying, hey, we are looking to cater to the top 1% of Manhattan. So right. That excludes a lot of people, especially BIPOC, communities.
Lower socioeconomic, middle socioeconomic, exactly, which is a varied mix of people, 100%.
Yeah. So a lot of people, as that movement and that opportunity to open up boutiques across America started happening, and we took advantage of that and have been very successful, we kind of looked at everything and said, you know what, we have an opportunity as BIPOC founders in high-end fitness to do something. So what we are focused on now is a streaming TV channel called Groove Me TV that we're launching hopefully this summer. We're in the pilot presentation now. And the 2 pain points that we're really focused on is that there's just a lack of representation in high-end fitness with instructors or even consumers and users. If you look at, even companies like Peloton who are, trying to be hyper aware, you look at their roster, for every 7 Caucasian teachers, you'll see 1 that might be of color. So we know that there's a lot of work to do. So what my wife and I come up with is to have a streaming TV channel that focuses on 100% health and wellness experts and instructors and founders of color. So that includes not only workouts on the physical side, but mental health is very much needed within those communities. Oh, the second other pain point is the huge racial health disparities in Black and brown communities. So just looking at those 2, underrepresentation and the racial health disparities in these communities, there is a huge need for what we're doing. And it's something that gets us out of bed. It's something that fires us up. So to be able to do a channel with programming and every face is going to be of color, that is the main feature. Obviously, it's inclusive. So we will see users and consumers that are part of this industry supporting us. They'll also be featured, but the content will contain workouts, cooking segments, things similar to Headspace and Calm, like guided meditation, affirmations, things like that. We're going to play in the spirituality world, which is very much growing for the BIPOC communities. You're seeing a lot of new experts emerging in that spirituality space, whether it's crystal healing,
Mm.
sound baths and things like that. So yeah, just a real positive, feel good celebration channel is what
Oh,
we're
I
up to.
cannot wait. That sounds so amazing. And what I'm also thinking about as you're talking about, you're starting off BIPOC, but everything else you're talking about can be very much inclusive of different religious identities, people who may be hard of hearing or deaf or blind, just being able to have access. And many different folks can have access because you, as a founders, are focused in on that. And so you are going to be able to open up this world to so many different people and be able to get feedback on what's working and what isn't, and be able to cater to so many folks that have been left out for, again, far too long.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that's cool, a big part of the channel will feature, we're doing, anywhere from 5 minute to 10-minute documentaries on some of these people that you're mentioning. And yeah, so we can just kind of highlight their story within these mini docs. So we're very, very much excited about telling those stories.
Yes, I cannot wait to be doing yoga next to somebody in a hijab who's fully clothed, or
Right, right.
somebody who's in a chair. I used to teach in a senior home their fitness classes, and I remember this one woman who was amazing. She couldn't stand, but she would sit, and she knew her modifications, but she could do everything except the squats and things like that. But she would do her triceps, she would do her biceps. I mean, she would do it all, and she would sit in her chair, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, wow, this is so cool. And she was,
Mhm.
she was there and present, and it was really great. It was good to see that. Zosimo, I am so excited for this channel coming up, and I'm excited for the streetwear doc. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, if you had to give me, this is my like staple question, if you had one call to action for us to be more inclusive in our lives, what is something that you would want to provide our listeners?
I think you have to try. And, activism comes in many, many different forms. It's easy to kind of hide in the background. And, we've been stereotyped as a passive, docile community. We're even encouraging the elders to start to speak up, to report incidents and crimes, because I think we're being taken advantage of for having some of those qualities. So my activism would be, don't be afraid to speak. Show your concern. You will probably have opposition. The more vocal you are, there will always be somebody there to combat you and troll you. And I think we have to be prepared for that. We have to be able to persevere through some of that noise to get to the other side. As we've seen, it's been a huge fight for the African American community for years and decades within this community. And,
Centuries. Yeah.
yeah, centuries. And we are, we do learn from that, from those movements. We are a part of those movements. We participate in those movements. And, just recently, it's kind of come to light that we have our own fight, as we probably always have. But this is that kind of rally cry for us to find each other, to find strength in numbers. And that's how you and I met, on Clubhouse with a great group that we've kind of assembled and put together and have been a support group for one another.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of times, and just, like I said, I grew up in a community with not many BIPOC faces, yeah, of Asian descent. And I kind of had to find them as I went to New York and LA, and even, back here in Cleveland, trying to wrangle up a group. Yeah, we're out there. And we just need to find each other, support each other. I know that we could be competitive with one another, and we are just stronger together. It's any win for me is a win for someone else. Anywhere that I can share my experience and share my knowledge and resources with somebody just helps us as a whole. And I think we got to look at it now, look at everything as a whole. We are all a part of this struggle. And first and foremost, I think it's realizing that you are a part of this struggle, because it's very easy to say, that does not apply to me. we don't face racism where I live. We're totally accepted within the community, but you have to look at all of us together.
Wonderful, wonderful, absolutely. And everything you said about you being a supporter and being there is absolutely who you are, Zosimo. So I thank you for that. Where can our listeners connect with you online and other places?
The best place is to find me on Instagram, just at Zosimo Maximo. If you want to check out Groove Ride, what we're doing there, that is at Groove Ride. It's GROOVERYDE. And then just as a filmmaker, hopefully you'll be seeing some of my things on the air here soon. And
awesome.
Groove Me TV will have a launch. As I said, we're in the pilot presentation, and once we get towards launch, you'll definitely be hearing about it.
That's amazing. Zosimo, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.